Hi, this is FUAD ABASOV, a broker with Right at Home Realty, and this is your monthly real estate statistics. In November, not only were sales up again, but with market conditions now starting to tighten up, prices moved slightly higher for the first time in almost a year and a half. With variable rates down and inventory up, buyers are striking before the iron gets hot. Normally, we might expect this market rebound to take a pause before resuming in the spring. However, the Bank of Canada's latest 50 basis point cut, together with a loosening of mortgage rules, could mean a more active winter market than normal. The new rules will allow all buyers to put down smaller down payments on homes that cost up to $1.5 million, and will allow first-time home buyers to pay off their loan over a longer period of time. This unique combination of lower rates and the new mortgage rules will help housing sales to continue climbing through the new year. It was more of the same for new home sales in November. The GTA new home market continued to languish. Consistent with a year-long trend in slow sales, the report finds November saw 759 new home sales across the GTA, following a mere 765 sales in October. Overall, sales in November were down a discouraging 55% year-over-year and 77% below the 10-year average. The narrative for months has been that the cost to build, compounded by high interest rates, is the cause of this standstill. The closer prices get to the cost it takes to build a new home, the more new home sales, and thus construction, will suffer, negatively impacting future supply in the midst of housing crisis. With housing starts in decline, government action to reduce the high level of government fees, taxes, and charges on new homes is one of the most viable means to quickly address the challenge and get things moving again. For example, City of Vaughan has introduced a late November decision to reduce development charges on single low-rise homes, which is a good example of an effort governments can take to lessen the economic pressure on new home builders. Hopefully, other municipalities will follow suit. Meanwhile, condominium apartments are down 81% from 2023 and 90% below the 10-year average. Toronto's condo market has been in a slump for a while now. After much speculation as to whether the Toronto real estate market will be able to absorb the sea of condos that has popped up, it seems that, at least for now, the answer is no. There's better value in the resale market than in new construction right now. Confusion and anxiety is a harsh reality in this sector, along with historic levels of backlog being blamed on everything from developers getting carried away to borrowing costs and tightening market conditions. Nowadays, we're seeing more end users, people buying condos to live in and not for investment purposes. And now, let's take a closer look at detached home sales in Toronto and surrounding areas. On the left side of the screen you will see detached home sales in October, while on the right side there will be detached home sales in November. So in Toronto in November, we've seen increase of sold properties compared to last year. November, which was up by 17.6%, the amount of new listings went down by almost 40%. Average sale price of detached home in November was up 7.5% compared to November of last year and was sitting at $1.74 million. In Vaughan, average selling price of detached home in November was $1.67 million, a 10% decrease compared to November of last year. The amount of sold properties went up by almost 40%. The amount of new listings went down by 37%. On average, it takes 31 days for a detached home to be sold in Vaughan today. Richmond Hill, average selling price of detached home in November was $2.05 million, 13% increase compared to November of last year. The amount of sold properties was up by 23%. The amount of new listings was down by 24%. On average, it takes 29 days for a detached home to be sold in Richmond Hill today. In Mississauga, average selling price of detached home in November was $1.43 million, 2% increase compared to November of last year. The amount of sold properties went down by almost 9%. The amount of new listings also went down by almost 48%. On average, it takes 32 days for a detached home to be sold in November nowadays. In Markham, average selling price of detached home in November was $1.69 million, 4.4% decrease compared to prices of last November. The amount of sold properties was down by 6.7%. The amount of new listings also decreased by 14.6%. It takes on average 26 days for a detached home to be sold in Markham today. Newmarket, average selling price of detached home in November was $1.24 million, 1.3% increase compared to prices of last November. The amount of sold properties went up by almost 48%. The amount of new listings, however, was down by 43%. On average, it takes 33 days for a detached home to be sold in Newmarket today. In Aurora, an average selling price of a detached home in November was $1.72 million, 6.2% increase compared to prices of last November. Amount of sold properties was the same as it was last November, and the amount of new listings was decreased by 25%. On average, it takes almost 35 days for a detached home to be sold in Aurora today. In Innisfil, average selling price of detached home in November was $928,000, 6.5% increase compared to prices of last November. The amount of sold properties went up by almost 70%. The amount of new listings was down by 24.8%. On average, it takes 45 days for a detached home to be sold in Innisfil today. King City, average selling price of a detached home in November was $3.1 million, 5% increase compared to November prices of last year. Amount of sold properties went up by 40% this November, and amount of new listings went down by 43%. On average, it takes 28 days for a detached home to be sold in King City today. In Bradford, in November, an average selling price of a detached home was $1.15 million, 2% increase compared to November of last year. The amount of sold properties went up by 13%. The amount of new listings decreased by 53%. On average, it takes 34 days for a detached home to be sold in Bradford today. In Milton, average selling price of a detached home in November was $1.41 million, 9% increase compared to prices of last November. The amount of sold properties was up by 34%. The amount of new listings, however, decreased by 45%. On average, it takes 38 days for a detached home to be sold in Milton today. In Stoufville, average selling price of a detached home in November was $1.54 million, almost 10% increase compared to prices of last November. The amount of sold properties was up by 18.5%. The amount of new listings, like everywhere else, was down by 34%. On average, it takes 55 days for a detached home to be sold in Stoufville today. In Barrie, average selling price of a detached home was $773,000, 1.3% decrease compared to prices of last November. The amount of sold properties went up by 63%. The amount of new listings has decreased by 16.6%. On average, it takes 35 days for a detached home to be sold in Barrie today. In Oakville, average selling price of a detached home was $2.2 million in November. It was up by almost 20% compared to November of last year. The amount of sold properties went up by 14.7%. The amount of new listings has decreased by 37%. On average, it takes 33 days for a detached home to be sold in Oakville today. The interplay of policy changes, economic uncertainty, and shifting buyer behavior is reshaping the real estate landscape. While resale markets show signs of strength, sustained efforts are needed to address the systemic issues hampering new construction, particularly in the face of a housing crisis. If you're interested in leveraging these insights for your next real estate decision or have a specific property or market question, feel free to ask.
If you'd like to receive your own personalized sales report about home sales in your neighborhood, please call me at 647-801-3401 or email me at sold@fuadhomes.com. Thanks for watching and see you next month.